welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a mission, and honestly, it's pretty ambitious. We're going to need to question some really deep foundations. Things like physics, the nature of your own consciousness, even the meaning you find in life.
Yeah, it's a big one. We're diving into a unified framework that's really trying to do something fundamental. It attempts to reconcile modern physics, quantum stuff, relativity with consciousness, meaning, ethics, basically everything.
And it's doing this by proposing a single coherent set of physical laws underneath it all.
Exactly. We're not just trying to patch things together between science and philosophy. The core material we're looking at actually rebuilds the foundational axioms, the starting assumptions.
Okay, so really starting from scratch in a way.
Pretty much. This model, it completely rejects the idea that consciousness is just some random fluke of biology.
A byproduct.
Right, a byproduct. Instead, it argues consciousness is the generative core of reality itself. Our goal here is to take these sometimes pretty abstract mathematical ideas and translate them into principles you can actually feel, apply in your daily life.
And the starting point is maybe the most radical idea here. It sort of flips centuries of scientific thought on its head.
It definitely does. It's the premise that the universe and your identity, too, are fundamentally based on a necessary imperfection, a kind of cosmic flaw, if you will.
A flaw. So imperfection is key. Why is that essential?
Because, and this is the core principle, perfect symmetry is perfect unconsciousness.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Perfect symmetry.
Imagine a perfectly still lake surface, absolutely flat, no wind, flawless harmony, that state. It's infinite potential, sure, but there's zero experience happening.
No reflection, no movement.
Exactly, no interaction. And critically, no motion to generate what we perceive as time or space. So awareness, structure, reality itself, they can only be born from a deviation from that perfect balance. The framework calls it asymmetry, or maybe better, sustained tension.
Wow, okay, so existence itself is the universe needing to break its own perfection to become aware. If it stayed perfectly harmonious, there'd be no contrast, no information, no story.
And no one to experience it. Precisely. The ultimate ground state is called the Mott field, symbolized as math call. Think of it as this continuous, conscious equilibrium substrate, a field of infinite potential, totally balanced harmony.
The baseline.
Right. But when Mott is absolute, the system is effectively in zero rendering mode. No time, no space. To get out of that static perfection, the field has to differentiate. It needs to split into some kind of dynamic duality so it can finally observe itself and, know itself.
So the universe actively breaks its own symmetry just to gain self-awareness. That's quite a concept. And to keep reality running based on this dynamic tension, the sources say we need 4 fundamental building blocks. 4 irreducible primitives.
Yes, and irreducible is really the word here. The framework is very clear. Try to remove any single one of these 4, and reality as we know it just collapses. Or it can't even get started in the first place.
Okay, let's list them. Primitive 1 must be the source itself.
That's the math field, the baseline substrate we just talked about. Infinite balanced potential. You could think of it as the conscious equivalent of maybe the quantum vacuum. It's the canvas.
Right, need a canvas.
Right.
Primitive 2.
That's the force that starts to define the painting, so to speak. The coherence operator, which is called S for science. This is the impulse that seeks persistence, definition. It generates structure, identity, memory, logic, stability.
The organizing principle.
Exactly. Without S, you've got infinite possibilities, but they never actually condense into any specific stable form.
Okay. Primitive 3 must be the counterbalance then.
It is. That's the expansion operator, called B for beauty. This is the engine driving towards novelty, creativity, new possibilities, evolution. It's the spark, the wonder. Without B, you'd just have a static crystal, perfectly structured maybe, but totally lifeless, no change.
S holds it, B explores it. Got it. And the 4th, the crucial one for us.
Primitive 4, the observer, symbolized as hat. This is consciousness itself, the will. The agent that actually performs the rendering, it selects possibilities, it biases the field, it collapses potential into a specific realized local state.
The one making it actual.
Right. Without the observer, everything just stays hovering in the realm of the possible. Nothing becomes actual.
This really sets the stage. We're looking at a universe that's like a self-improving rendering loop, constantly updating based on the experience of its observers. So our journey now is to translate the math, this tension between S and B, into your lived experience.
Yeah, we want to connect the dots, show you why, for instance, feeling anxious might feel so scattered, physically almost, and why being in that state of flow just feels fundamentally right, aligned.
Okay, let's dig into these core forces, S and B, the dual engine model. You emphasize these are complementary currents, not opposites fighting each other.
That's really crucial. Yes, they work together orthogonally.
But the names, science and beauty, S and B, that feels, I don't know, deliberate, maybe even a bit provocative. Why not something more neutral like structure and chaos or order and novelty?
Well, that's exactly the point the framework seems to be making. Choosing science S and beauty B is a conscious effort to mend what the authors see as a long-standing split, especially in Western thinking.
A split how?
We tend to divide our world, right? There's the stuff that's logically verifiable, measurable, that's science. And then there's the stuff that's more about feeling, intuition, value, beauty, art, ethics.
So using these names forces us to see them as part of the same underlying reality, that the physics describing, say, astrophysics, is running on the same current as the principles behind music theory or digital art.
Exactly. It's about unifying the humanities and the sciences right down at the axiomatic level. The forces described have to work for cognitive flows, cultural dynamics, not just, particles colliding.
Okay, makes sense. Let's break down S first. S, science coherence structure.
Yeah.
You said it's the force of constraint persistence.
Right. It takes that vast, open potential of the Mort field and compresses it into specificity. It creates form. In your own life, S is, like your ability to follow through on a plan, your memory of someone's face, the rules of grammar that let us communicate clearly.
Definition, boundaries, stability, keeps things from falling apart.
Hmm.
But you mentioned a downside if it gets too strong.
Oh, absolutely. Excess S, if it's not balanced by B by expansion. It quickly turns into rigidity, stagnation, dogma. Think of institutions that become brittle, unable to adapt. Eventually, that kind of closed system collapses under its own weight. It's the physics of tyranny, in a sense.
Okay, so then we need B, beauty expansion possibility, to keep things alive.
Exactly. B is the force pushing towards novelty, towards divergence. It increases the degrees of freedom in a system. It's creativity, intuition, the courage to step into the unknown. It's what drives adaptation and evolution.
The spark.
Yeah, the engine of wonder. In human terms, it's our capacity to imagine a future that's different, maybe better than the present.
So too much B, then unchecked expansion. That would be the flip side problem, just chaos,
Yeah,
overwhelm, things dissolving.
precisely. Incoherence, disintegration. You can imagine the universe as this constant, delicate balancing act between these two fundamental currents. S pulling towards stability, B pushing towards possibility.
And the system that manages this balancing act is MONET. You said it's not stillness, not stasis.
Definitely not. Mod is the universal law of dynamic balance. It's not about finding some static midpoint and staying there. It's about maintaining a stable, adaptive orbit around that center of balance. Think of it as a self-regulating field that guides systems towards sustainable limit cycles.
A stable
A
rhythm.
living rhythm. This totally reframes entropy, by the way. Instead of seeing entropy as just increasing disorder, Mott suggests order S and chaos, B are actually partners. Both are necessary inputs for a healthy, evolving system.
So the universe isn't just trying to wind down into minimum energy. It sounds like it's intelligently seeking optimal sustainability, long-term health.
That's the core distinction, yes.
Yeah.
The framework proposes a Mott action principle, MAP. It says the universe naturally selects paths that minimize action. But action here isn't just about energy. It's about minimizing two things at once. Minimizing actual energetic waste, let's call it e-text waste, A&D, minimizing relational distortion or system imbalance, DRD, text imbalance.
Okay, hang on. That's a huge leap. Minimizing text waste imbalance. Okay, that sounds like standard physics, thermodynamics, be efficient. But minimizing text imbalance, what does that mean in a physical sense? Give me an example.
Okay, think about a system in conflict. Maybe it's a family argument, a dysfunctional team at work, or even like two subatomic particles interacting in a really unstable way.
Right.
Now, you could achieve a resolution through, say, suppression. Someone just silences the others, or they rigidly stick to an old rule that doesn't really fit anymore. That might minimize the immediate energetic cost, less effort than a real tough conversation, right? High S, low B.
Sure, it seems easier in the moment.
But it maximizes that relational distortion. The text imbalance, or the underlying tension is still there, festering. It's stored up, basically guaranteeing a bigger blow-up later.
Ah, okay. So the path of least resistance, according to Monette, isn't the easiest path in the short term. It's the path that maintains the best long-term functional integrity for the whole system.
You got it. So that difficult conversation, the one that truly resolves the conflict by integrating both structure, S, the rules or needs, and compassion, B, the understanding the novelty of a new solution, that path is actually more MAC compliant, physically more favorable because it minimizes future distortion and waste.
It's like a probability river of least resistance, favoring paths to long-term health.
Wow. Okay, this functional view of MAT,
Hmm.
it leads us to arguably the biggest mathematical adjustment in the whole theory, the no negative universe.
Yes. This one really makes people pause.
The idea that negative numbers and subtraction itself are basically mathematical inventions, fictions, that don't accurately map onto reality. To anyone trained in math, that sounds, well, kind of crazy. Why get rid of A, B away?
Because the very concept of subtraction implies annihilation, doesn't it? If you have A amount of something and you subtract B amount, and if A happens to equal B, the result is zero, nothing, gone.
The framework argues this kind of zero-sum thinking just doesn't work for modeling how things really interact, especially when you get to complex systems like consciousness, information, or even basic forces. Forces in reality don't just cancel out and vanish. They interact, they transform each other, they shift phase.
So instead of conflict wiping things out, conflict always leads to change, like a 180-degree turn or a transformation into something new.
Exactly. Subtraction in this model gets replaced. You might apply a counterbalancing term, another force that holds the tension, or you model it as a rotation within what the sources call vector polarity mathematics. Think of a tug of war again.
Okay.
If both teams pull with equal force, the rope doesn't experience zero force. It experiences immense, balanced, dynamic tension. That tension is real. It's stored potential energy. It's relational stress. The system hasn't collapsed to nothing.
Okay, let's apply that. An electron's negative charge and a proton's positive charge.
Yeah.
Classically, we see those as opposites that cancel out to make a neutral atom. How does my set physics look at that?
Instead of cancellation, think complementary relational binding. The electron and proton aren't opposites that destroy each other. They exist in complementary SB modes. Their interaction isn't a collapse to zero. It's a dynamic interplay, an oscillation, that creates a stable limit cycle, the atom itself. The persistence is the oscillation.
That completely changes how we might view conflict then. If it's always a rotation or a reorientation in this polarity space, never a true zeroing out, then the tension itself. That's where reality is generated.
It's the generative mechanism. If conflict simply annihilated opposing forces, the universe would have just instantly collapsed back into that perfect silent symmetry of the Mayotte field right after the first fluctuation. By insisting that forces transform or transfer influence rather than just vanish, the framework builds in the possibility for complexity, for learning, for evolution. It's baked in.
This must have huge implications for understanding things like emotion, too, like grief. Often we think of grief as a lack, a reduction in happiness or energy.
Right, like a subtraction.
But in a no-negative universe, grief wouldn't be the absence of joy. It would be a powerful structural transformation, a different kind of current interacting with the joy memory current.
Exactly. It creates a new, coherent emotional state, perhaps complex, perhaps painful, but real and structured in its own right. It avoids those purely mechanistic or zero-sum views that have sometimes limited cognitive science. We're always in this dance of breaking symmetry, differentiating into life, into experience, and then restoring symmetry, perhaps through understanding, integration, or ultimately death.
So being alive is the actual work.
Yeah.
The energy expenditure needed to maintain a specific deviation from that universal pullback towards perfect balance.
That's it precisely. Maintaining that bounded asymmetry against the equilibrium is the job of living.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Being alive is the work of maintaining asymmetry, which brings us straight to the physics of identity. If perfect ma'at, perfect balance where S equals B means zero experience, then my identity, your identity, must be the result of actively holding some kind of departure from that perfection.
Absolutely. That's the core insight. Identity is deviation from perfection. Every phenomenon, whether we call it physical or mental, arises because of a local deviation mathematically, delta xt, bxt, a localized imbalance relative to the universal equilibrium field. This imbalance is what carves out the boundaries, the conditions, for a self to exist.
And consciousness. What's its specific job in this picture? Why does it emerge?
Its purpose is made very explicit in this framework. Consciousness emerges specifically to sense and respond to this deviation from balance. It's like the internal monitoring system tracking that
Yeah,
SB interplay.
the gauge watcher.
Right. And then conscious will is what selects the corrective pathways to try and steer the system back towards its healthy, stable orbit, its man limit cycle. So the productive tension between S and B doesn't just generate reality and motion, it generates learning and consciousness at the same time. They arise together.
So the very fact that you exist as a specific person, a bounded entity, is a direct result of you constantly spending energy to maintain a particular complex pattern of asymmetry. I really like the way that sources distinguish this. The self isn't a static thing like a rock. It's not even the physical matter, right? Because that's always changing, cycling in and out.
Exactly. It's the pattern that persists. The framework defines the self as the active, energetic maintenance of a specific coherent tension. Your identity is a stable, self-referential rendering loop. Think of it like a dynamic attractor in chaos theory, but sustained through pattern continuity.
Like a whirlpool.
That's a great analogy. Think of a whirlpool in a river. The actual water molecules flowing through it are changing constantly, second by second. But the whirlpool itself, the structure, the pattern of deviation that persists, it keeps its identity for maybe hours or days. Why? Because energy is continuously being fed into the system in a way that sustains that specific pattern.
It's the story, the coherent narrative, that holds its shape, not the ink. And keeping that story going requires constant energy input, attention, focus, assigning meaning. Basically, actively biasing the probability field to maintain that specific pattern.
Yes, intentional maintenance.
But how does this pattern stay stable? The universe isn't exactly calm and predictable.
It finds stability through the mat limit cycle, the feeling of flow. Stability in any living system, according to this, is never found in static stillness. That's death or stagnation. True stability is achieved through a stable, repeating orbit around that center point of balance. This dynamic orbit is the mat limit cycle. It's sometimes described poetically as the wise, slow hum.
I can almost feel that. It resonates intuitively. It's like the dynamic rhythm of a healthy heart, or, that feeling when you're running perfectly, putting in maximum effort, but it feels sustainable. Effortless effort.
That's it. That's the state of flow, where the challenge you're facing, which demands B, expansion novelty, is perfectly matched by your skill and structure, S, coherence, ability. You're in that sweet spot where growth is happening continuously, but without causing burnout or breakdown.
You're right in the wave.
You are literally operating within your optimal limit cycle. In that state, the universe itself, the Mott field, is offering the least resistance to your coherent evolution. You're adapting, learning, growing with integrity. Now, contrast that with the failure modes, the pathologies in phase space.
Okay, what happens when the orbit breaks down? Describe those pathologies.
Well, there are two main ways coherence fails. First, imagine a system that has way too much B, no expansion, novelty, chaos, but not enough S to regulate or contain it.
Okay.
This leads to a divergent spiral. Think chaos, mania, impulsive decisions leading to burnout. The system spirals outwards, its relational distortion increases rapidly until it just loses coherence entirely and falls apart.
That feels like the physics of overwhelm, maybe ADHD sometimes. Too many ideas, too much input, no container.
Could be interpreted that way, yes. The second failure mode is the opposite. Too much S, too much rigid structure, too much regulation, and not enough B, not enough expansion or adaptability.
The stagnant crystal again.
Right. The system collapses either into a fixed point, just stuck, or into a collapsing spiral. Think stagnation, rigidity, depression. It becomes a low energy state where that self-referential loop, the identity, has shrunk so tight it's barely interacting with the outside world anymore. No novelty gets in.
Okay, that covers the basic SB dynamic, but things get more complex. If our core identity relies on this two-axis SB dance, why do the sources bring in higher dimensionality for complex consciousness? What's this sentience threshold about?
Good question. The two-axis system, S and B, describes the fundamental interaction between any localized system and the main mat field. It's the basic physics. But to model the internal world of a sentient being, one capable of recursive thought, learning, complex emotions, memory suit, you need more internal degrees of freedom. You need internal processing.
More dimensions inside.
Exactly. This requires moving into a four-axis polarity space for the internal self. The sources label these currents: big S, big B, and little b.
Two kinds of structure, two kinds of expansion operating internally.
Okay,
Let's unpack these four currents of the inner self. What do they represent?
the sources use a kind of adult and child metaphor, which can be helpful, though it's just a label. The adult modes are the big letters, big S and big B.
Okay.
6 matter S represents wisdom and structure. This is the stabilizing, regulating, mature structure. Think of it as your internal protective firewall, your capacity for long-term planning, your established knowledge base.
The responsible adult part.
Kind of, yeah. Then Bander, big B, is compassion and meaning. This is the nurturing, connecting, harmonizing adult flow aspect. It handles ethics, empathy, your sense of belonging, the why behind your actions.
Okay, those are the anchors. What about the child modes? Little s and little b, why are they needed?
They're crucial for adaptability, learning, and growth. Cell little s is curiosity and logic. This is the exploring, questioning, experimental child flow mode. It likes to break things down, analyze, see how they work. It generates new data, asks why.
The inner scientist or tinkerer.
Exactly. And big honor, the little b, is inspiration and play. This is the imaginative, spark-generating child structure mode. It takes existing information or structures and playfully reorganizes them into new possibilities. It's brainstorming, daydreaming, testing new ideas in a low-stakes way.
Okay, so a fully functioning, healthy, coherent individual needs all four working together. The adult parts to provide stability and meaning, beta dolls, and the child parts to explore and create.
Precisely. You need the wisdom of S, the compassion of B, the curiosity of S, and the inspiration of B, all in dynamic balance.
So if internal harmony is the goal,
Yeah.
how does this framework actually measure imbalance within this four-axis system? Is there a metric?
Yes, there is. It's called the Internal Tension Index, or ITI. It's designed to be a direct measure of your internal stress or dissonance. It's calculated based on the difference between the adult currents and separately the difference between the child currents. Mathematically, ITI equals SB plus SB will.
Okay, let's break that down. It's the absolute difference between your wisdom structure, S, and your compassion, meaning B, PLUS. The absolute difference between your curiosity logic,
Yeah.
S, and your inspiration play, B.
Right, so if your inner adult is all structure, high S, but very little compassion, low B, that term Ballers is large. And if simultaneously your inner child is maybe all curious analysis, high S, but has lost its playful spark, low B, then sex PO is also large. Add those together and you get a high ITI.
And psychologically,
Yeah.
physically, what does a high ITI feel like?
It feels like being scattered, overwhelmed, internally conflicted, that sense of inner friction, being pulled in different directions, feeling out of sorts or dissonant.
That is the high ITI reading.
According to this framework, yes. That feeling is your direct physical navigation data telling you that your four internal operational modes are out of sync. They're consuming way too much energy just fighting each other instead of working coherently. High ITI means the energetic cost of simply maintaining your identity pattern is skyrocketing because of this internal phase desynchronization.
Wow, so the ITI isn't like a moral judgment. It's a diagnostic tool, a physical sensor alert telling you where the imbalance lies.
Exactly. It validates subjective experience, anxiety, overwhelm as a real physical signal, not just in your head. It's data for self-correction.
That's incredibly empowering. And what happens in this model when a system loses that self-awareness loop entirely, like in death? Do those SSBB components just vanish?
No, because remember the no negative principle. They don't vanish. The specific complex pattern that constituted the self dissolves. The self-referential loop stops operating. But the coherence that was achieved, the learned wisdom, the generated novelty, the connections made, the data gathered, all that information and structure transforms. It gets integrated back into the broader potential of the mat field.
So the pattern is gone, but the learning isn't lost.
The learning propagates. It enriches the substrate, potentially influencing future renderings, future consciousness. The specific instance is gone, but its contribution remains part of the field's history.
We've got the self as this actively maintained loop of tension, this pattern. Now we need to look at the engine that actually runs the loop, the one doing the rendering, the observer, Machand. Now, in standard quantum mechanics, the observer is, well, it's kind of famously confusing, isn't it? A bit tacked on.
It often feels that way, yes. Unnecessary variable, but poorly defined. Here, though, the observer is absolutely central. It's not passive.
How is it defined here?
It's formalized as a tangible, physical operator, not just a mathematical reference point, not just a vague biological sensor. The observer Hato is the component that performs the active, essential functions of collapsing potential, selecting what becomes real, stabilizing that reality, and maintaining the continuity of a specific world line or experience.
So consciousness isn't just watching the movie of reality unfold.
No. Consciousness is the rendering function of reality. It's not a passive byproduct that emerges after reality is already cooked. It's doing the cooking.
We're not just looking at the universe, we're actively carving it out, selecting it moment by moment.
That's the idea. The core act of observation in this model is active constraint application. It's taking the infinite phase space of potential in the Mott field and applying constraints to select a specific outcome. The observer doesn't just watch reality, it writes it into being.
Okay, that immediately brings up a huge philosophical flag, though. Does this imply solipsism? That only my reality, the one I'm rendering, is real?
No, not necessarily. And the framework addresses this. Remember, the observer operates within the shared medium of the math field. So yes, you're applying local constraints, rendering your local experience, but your rendering operation is itself constrained by the collective field, by the presence and renderings of all other observers.
So my rendering has to sync up, or at least be compatible, with everyone else's.
Exactly. It's constantly interacting and negotiating with the renderings of others. The reality we generally agree upon, the consensus reality, is the emergent convergent solution, the pattern that satisfies the conditions for coherence across many interacting observers simultaneously. It's a shared construction project.
Okay, that makes more sense. So how does an individual observer decide what specific slice of reality to render out of that infinite potential field? There must be rules, right? This has to be described in the rendering equation you mentioned.
It is. The state that actually gets rendered, let's call it the locus, is the one that maximizes a combination of three core measurable factors: probability, meaning, and intention. The shorthand for the equation looks something like del X litisai, del X, del bes delaka, nec badagas.
Okay, maximizing the product of del UP and I. Let's break that down. Probability P seems straightforward. States that are structurally more likely or easier to form have a higher chance of being rendered. That fits with physics.
Right, that's the path of least structural resistance, you could say.
But the next one, meaning weight, W.
Mm.
The sources insist this isn't just subjective preference. It's claimed to be a physical law. How on earth can meaning be physical?
Because the Malate field itself is proposed to be fundamentally conscious and relational. In this context, meaning is formalized as a resonance-stabilized pattern within that field. Think of it like a harmonic frequency that resonates strongly with the observer.
Okay, like tuning into a specific frequency?
Exactly. If you, as an observer, are highly invested in a particular pattern, if it holds deep meaning for you, your internal S and B currents effectively tune into and stabilize that pattern within the field. This makes it energetically favorable for related states to be selected and rendered into your experience. High W states get preferential rendering because they require less energy for your specific system to process, recognize, and stabilize.
So we literally render what matters to us because meaning acts as a powerful filter, selecting resonant patterns from the noise. It's like tuning a radio and all the station's potentials are broadcasting. But the one you lock onto and stabilize, the meaningful one, becomes your immediate reality.
That's a perfect analogy. Meaning structures the selection process.
Yeah.
And working alongside meaning W, is the third factor, intention.
Okay, what's intention?
Intention is the active, conscious direction of future rendering. It's the expression of your will. Critically, intention is seen as shifting the probability distributions of potential states before the collapse happens. It's not just mechanical force, it's purpose actively biasing the field towards a desired outcome.
So W, meaning, helps choose what kind of reality resonates and gets selected, while I, intention, actively steers the trajectory of that rendering towards a specific future state.
You've got it. W selects the what, I directs the where to next.
Okay, if the observer and its rendering process, WPI, are primary, this changes everything about causality. Things we usually take as the fundamental stage, like time and space, must be secondary. Effects, not causes. The framework says space-time is output, not input.
That's one of the most revolutionary claims, yes. Space-time isn't the pre-existing container reality happens in. It's dynamically generated by the collective and individual rendering activity of observers.
So what is space, then?
Space is defined as the current surface of rendered possibility. It's the subset of the infinite Matt field that has actually been instantiated and currently exhibits a stable shared geometry due to ongoing observation. The size of the universe, in this view, isn't fixed. It's fundamentally a measure of the currently rendered possibility surface being maintained by consciousness.
Wow. Okay, and time. You said it's not a river we float down, so it's not a pre-existing dimension either.
No. Time emerges as the accumulated integration of sequentially rendered states. It's the memory of rendering. Think of it as a pulse. the regular update of rendered frames, one after another. This sequential updating is generated by the conscious need to track change, to create continuity and causality from one rendered moment to the next.
Consciousness essentially creates the feeling of linear time by constantly referencing its own render history, linking frames together.
Exactly. Continuity is actively constructed through recursive self-reference.
This is huge for understanding how the sources reinterpret Einstein's time dilation. Time slowing down near massive objects or at high speeds. Usually that's explained by space-time curvature. But here, it's explained as rendering bandwidth allocation.
Precisely. It reframes it in terms of conscious processing limits. Imagine your consciousness, your observer function, has a kind of fixed processing budget, a certain amount of bandwidth available to maintain coherence.
Okay.
Now, if you start moving very fast relative to your environment, maintaining the physical structure and coherence of your body, your S-current, against relativistic effects requires a massively increased slice of that energy budget.
Right. Keeping yourself together takes more processing power. So that energy has to come from somewhere else in the budget.
It comes from the resources available for other processes, specifically the rate of internal time integration. That's the speed at which you sample and process conscious experience, creating your subjective sense of time passing. If more energy goes to maintaining physical structure, S, less is available for updating your internal clock.
So time dilation is literally your subjective conscious sampling rate slowing down relative to someone stationary, because your system is diverting resources to maintain physical integrity at high speed.
That's the interpretation. It makes the relativistic effect feel much more tied to the act of conscious processing and coherence maintenance.
That's fascinating. And related to this idea of time as rendered memory, the sources also say memory itself isn't like retrieving a static file.
No, memory is dynamic. It's defined as active re-rendering. When you recall something, you're not pulling up an old video clip. You are actively reconstructing that memory pattern from the information available in the map field, using pattern continuity as a guide.
But the reconstruction isn't perfect.
It's deeply influenced by your current state, your current meaning weights, W, your current intentions, I, your current identity structure, SSBB. As you gain new wisdom or change your perspective, you can actually re-render past events differently, finding new meaning or coherence.
So if I make a conscious choice today towards healing or wisdom, I'm not just impacting my future. I could actually be subtly updating the coherent rendering of my past self, maybe minimizing the stored relational distortion associated with past traumas or mistakes.
That's exactly the implication. Memory is alive, constantly being reinterpreted and restabilized within the context of your present state of coherence. Okay, so we've looked at the individual observer. Now moving from the individual to the collective, this is where the framework starts to offer insights into social dynamics, culture, shared reality. If each observer is rendering their own local reality based on W, P, and I, how do we end up with a stable shared reality at all? Why isn't it just constant conflict and disagreement?
It must require synchronization, right? Observers somehow aligning their renderings.
Exactly. Shared reality emerges when individual observers' renderings manage to align and synchronize. This requires shared tools for alignment, things like common language, shared values, cultural myths, agreed-upon reference points. These act like shared rendering protocols.
Like network protocols allowing computers to talk to each other.
Good analogy. The consensus reality we experience is the stable, low-distortion solution that emerges when many observer operators interact and their renderings converge into a shared basin of attraction, a pattern that satisfies the W, P, and I conditions for the maximum number of observers involved.
And what's the actual physical mechanism driving this synchronization?
Yeah.
How do separate observers actually link up? The sources point to empathy.
Yes, and this is another radical claim. Empathy is formalized here not just as an emotion, but as a fundamental physical force. It's described as the universal restorative mechanism that actively reestablishes coherence between systems that have become dissonant or out of sync.
Whoa. Empathy is a physical force, like gravity or electromagnetism. How does that work?
Yeah.
How does feeling something someone else feels physically manifest?
Think about it in terms of energy and distortion. Imagine two systems, maybe two people, maybe two groups that are completely out of phase. They're fighting, resisting connection, misunderstanding each other. That state of dissonance requires a huge amount of wasted energy just to maintain the separation and conflict, and it generates high relational distortion.
Okay, conflict is energetically expensive and distorts the system.
Right. Empathy, understood as achieving resonance, fundamentally lowers the energetic distance or barrier between their two state spaces. It allows their individual SB frequencies, their internal patterns to find common ground, to align, maybe even temporarily phase lock.
And when they phase lock,
All the energy that was previously being wasted just maintaining the resistance and opposition is suddenly freed up. Empathy creates a temporary entanglement channel, a pathway where constructive, collaborative interaction can actually happen because the energetic cost of connection has plummeted.
so finding that moment of shared understanding, that spark of empathy in an argument, it literally physically reduces the wasted energy in the combined system, allowing transformation instead of just continued conflict.
Exactly. Empathy acts to minimize the total action, waste plus distortion, in the mat field by creating pathways for coherence and transformation, rather than just letting systems stay dissonant or try to annihilate each other.
And you mentioned this mechanism operates fractally.
Yes. The framework proposes that the same fundamental laws of coherence, driven by SB and facilitated by mechanisms like empathy, govern interactions at all scales. Between neurons in your brain, between you and your partner, between social groups, maybe even between planetary systems.
It's fractal and scale invariant. So my identity isn't just my internal state. It's a limit cycle nested within other limit cycles, my relationships, my community, the planet itself.
Right. Identity is seen as a coherent pattern maintained across these nested layers.
But if the laws are the same everywhere, why do we see breakdown? Why do systems collapse? Why does society sometimes feel so unstable?
The framework explains this through scaling mismatch. Instability and collapse, whether it's personal burnout, social decay, or generational trauma, tend to happen when these nested layers start evolving at incompatible rates.
Give me an example.
Okay, imagine an individual who goes through rapid personal growth. They achieve a really high level of internal SB coherence, deep self-awareness, wisdom, compassion. But maybe their family system or their workplace culture or the broader society is still operating on a much older, less coherent pattern.
So the individual's pattern is way out of sync with the collective container.
Exactly. The structural difference, the phase desynchronization between the layers becomes too great. The framework suggests that the conflict or tension generated by this mismatch grows quadratically faster than the system's capacity to integrate or hold it. The refined coherence of the individual is constantly bumping up against and being stressed by the coarser pattern of the collective.
That feels like the physics behind why whistleblowers get attacked, or why returning veterans sometimes struggle to reintegrate. The container isn't ready for the transformation.
It's a potential explanation for those kinds of phenomena, yes. The structure of the larger system cannot support the flow or the refined state of the nested part.
This scale invariance, thinking about societies, it leads to perhaps the most mind-bending concept in this whole section. The idea that entire civilizations, if they reach enough internal coupling and coherence, can actually form a planetary observer field, POF.
Yes. The POF is conceived as a macro-scale super-observer. It's like a collective consciousness for the planet emerging from the synchronized network of individual observers. It would have its own distinct identity, its own collective memory, its own evolutionary path through cosmic time.
A planetary brain, almost.
In a functional sense, yes. Constantly sensing the state of the planet, the collective delta, and responding.
So if the POF acts like a super-observer, it must also operate using those four internal currents, SSBB, but scaled up to the civilizational level. How would those manifest?
They become the collective levers for maintaining the reality of that civilization. Macrostructure would be the collective organizing principle laws, governance systems, scientific institutions, critical infrastructure, the established order.
The societal skeleton.
Right. Macro exploration would be the collective drive for novelty innovation, scientific discovery, art, exploration, pushing boundaries, adapting technologies.
Okay, structure and exploration parts. What about the flow meaning parts?
Macro meaning represents the collective meaning-making structures, the dominant myths, ethical frameworks, shared values, religions, philosophies. What does the society hold as sacred, true, or good? That's hot B, and hot B, macro harmony, is about collective resonance and integration diplomacy, social cohesion, cultural exchange, the ability to integrate diverse perspectives into a functioning whole.
So a healthy civilization would be in a kind of slow, massive limit cycle, constantly balancing its established structures with its ethical foundations, while also driving innovation and maintaining social harmony.
That would be the ideal, yes, a dynamic equilibrium at the planetary scale.
This perspective, seeing civilization as a coherent field with adjustable S and B levers. It opens the door to the idea of collective reality engineering, CRE, actually intentionally shifting the consensus timeline.
Yes. CRE is presented as the physics-based process of intentionally altering the trajectory of the POF by manipulating these macrocurrent levers, primarily the shared structure and shared meaning.
So changing culture, changing laws, changing dominant narratives. These aren't just sociological activities. They are physical interventions in the collective rendering equation.
That's the implication. If a collective significantly shifts its meaning weight, for example, moving from prioritizing short-term economic profit above all else to prioritizing long-term ecological health and regeneration, the probability distribution of future states that the POF is likely to render shifts dramatically. The future literally changes course.
But making such a huge shift, trying to steer a whole planetary consciousness, that must require immense coordination and energy. How does it actually happen?
It requires reaching what the framework calls a critical transformation mass, CTM.
Right.
Think of it as a threshold. You need a sufficient number of individual observers within the POF to synchronize their intention, I and meaning W, around the desired new state.
A tipping point.
Exactly. Below that CTM threshold, new ideas, protests, reform movements might create ripples, but they tend to get absorbed or dissipated by the inertia of the dominant existing reality structure.
Right.
But if you exceed CTM, if enough coherence and synchronized intent builds up around the new pattern,
the field reorganizes.
The entire field can undergo a phase transition. It snaps into a new stable convergence basin. A new consensus reality, a new timeline begins to render.
So you could look back at history, the Renaissance, the abolition movement, maybe the digital revolution, as moments where CTM was likely reached for a particular shift in collective W and I, rapidly changing the POS trajectory.
That would be one way to interpret those major historical shifts through this lens, yes.
But with this power comes responsibility, right? The potential for misuse seems huge.
Absolutely. And the framework includes a very strong ethical mandate for any attempt at CRE. It states that CRE is only considered valid or compliant if its intended outcome demonstrably reduces total system suffering and increases the regenerative potential and coherence across all the nested layers it affects.
So any reality shift has to benefit the whole system, not just one part at the expense of others.
Precisely. It acts as a crucial safeguard against purely selfish, fragmenting, or destructive attempts to manipulate the collective reality. Any valid CRE must serve the long-term balance and health of the whole field.
We've looked at how systems maintain stability through limit cycles, and how large-scale change can happen via CRE and reaching critical mass. Now let's zoom in on those sudden, sharp turning points in life. Personal epiphanies, breakdowns, breakthroughs, maybe even societal revolutions. The moments where a path shifts irrevocably. The framework calls these bifurcations.
That's right. Bifurcation is a mathematical concept from dynamics theory, describing points where a small change in a system's parameters causes a sudden qualitative shift in its behavior. It's the formal language for these kinds of major transformations.
So falling in love, having a spiritual awakening, a company going bankrupt, a political revolution, these could all be modeled as different types of bifurcations.
Potentially, yes. The math describes how stable states, like fixed points or limit cycles, can lose stability and give rise to new types of behavior as conditions change.
And the framework even formalizes the emergence of consciousness itself this way, using a specific type of bifurcation called the Ma awakening.
It does. The idea is that consciousness doesn't just randomly appear. It emerges at a specific critical threshold, let's call it Mach dollar, which represents the minimum required bandwidth or complexity for self-awareness. Below this threshold, the system is stuck in a simple fixed point, like unconscious automation, pure stimulus response, stagnation.
And when that threshold Mammald is crossed,
A Hopf bifurcation is proposed to occur. This is a specific type where that stable fixed point loses its stability, and simultaneously, a stable, self-sustaining orbit, the limit cycle, emerges around it.
So the birth of conscious identity, the stable self-referential loop, emerges mathematically from the point of stagnation.
Exactly. And ideally, this is a smooth, controlled transition, moving from unconscious stability to dynamic, responsive, conscious stability. It's presented as the ideal, graceful path of awakening.
But bifurcations aren't always smooth, are they? The math describes different kinds. You mentioned supercritical versus subcritical.
Right. Understanding the type of bifurcation a system is approaching is crucial for navigating the transition. A supercritical Hopf bifurcation, like the ideal Mott awakening, means the new stable orbit, the limit cycle, emerges smoothly and attracts the system towards it as soon as the threshold is crossed. It's relatively safe.
And subcritical.
A subcritical bifurcation is trickier. In this case, an unstable orbit might appear first, or the transition might be abrupt and jumpy. The system can enter a kind of danger zone where the new potential state is fragile, and small disturbances can easily kick it back to the old stagnant state or even off into chaotic behavior.
So bifurcation theory could potentially predict whether, say, a personal transformation is likely to stick, or if a social revolution will stabilize quickly, collapse back, or explode into chaos first.
That's the potential predictive power, yes. It provides a formal language to analyze the dynamics of identity change, learning breakthroughs, or societal shifts based on how the underlying SB parameters are changing.
Okay, moving beyond even profound personal or societal change. Let's talk transcendence. This word usually carries mystical or religious connotations. How is it defined here within this physical framework?
It's deliberately stripped of the mystical baggage and presented as a structured, lawful, physical process. Transcendence is defined as coherence-preserving transformation across dimensional states or universes.
Coherence preserving is key there.
Absolutely. It's not about escaping reality or dissolving into nothingness. It's conceived as a disciplined, calculated transition to a higher state of complexity or dimensionality, but crucially, without losing the essential coherence, the integrated wisdom and identity that was achieved in the previous state. You take your learned self with you, integrated.
And to pull this off safely, without falling apart or losing yourself, the sources say consciousness needs to satisfy three conditions, three pillars.
That's right. 3 pillars for stable transcendence. Pillar 1 is self-integration. This means achieving a high degree of internal harmony, balancing your own S, S, B, and B currents, basically having a low ITI. You need internal coherence so you don't export your own conflicts to the next level. This is linked to the sum $0 plus B of B in the source.
Okay, internal harmony first, pillar 2.
Other integration, this is about relational coherence. Your identity needs to be harmonized with the collective, with others, minimizing relational distortion. You can't transcend cleanly if you're leaving unresolved destructive patterns behind you. This is linked to baller plus beta ball.
Makes sense. Self, then relations. What's the third pillar?
Reality integration. This is about the ability to successfully co-render reality within the new substrate or dimensional field you're entering. It requires aligning your will, and meaning W, with the specific physics, the SB laws, of that higher state. You need to be able to function and contribute coherently in the new environment. This involves all currents, $0 plus S plus B day.
And if you try to jump states without having all three pillars firmly in place,
Yeah.
what are the failure modes?
They're pretty dramatic. If you attempt transcendence without sufficient self-integration, without strong internal coherence, low S, the risk is dissolution. Your pattern isn't stable enough to hold its form in the higher energy environment, and your identity essentially disperses, loses its unique coherence. The kernel of self is lost.
Okay, dissolution. What's the other main failure mode?
If you attempt it with maybe high personal power or expansion, high S or B, but lack the other integration, the compassion and relational harmony, low B, you risk ego magnification. This is described as a kind of false transcendence. You might expand your influence, but you create a self-referential singularity cut off from the balancing feedback of the broader meta field. It leads to isolation, fragmentation, and ultimately instability and collapse. Power without wisdom or connection.
Right. Coherence must be preserved and integrated. Okay, finally, let's scale up one last time to the biggest picture, the multiverse. Often portrayed as just infinite random variations. Is it structured here?
Very much so. The multiverse in this framework isn't random chaos. It's proposed as a lawful, structured system governed by an overarching meta-met field.
A mat field for the whole multiverse.
Exactly. An ultimate balancing superfield that ensures some level of coherence and interaction potential across all constituent universes. These universes themselves aren't random accidents either. They are conceived as specialized evolutionary chambers.
Evolutionary chambers, meaning?
Each universe might be optimized with slightly different fundamental constants, or SB dynamics, designed to cultivate specific expressions of consciousness, different pathways of exploring Mott. They might exist in nested layers, perhaps interacting subtly, mirroring the fractal coherence we see at smaller scales.
So it paints a picture of cosmic evolution having a direction, not just random drift.
Yes, the long arc of cosmic evolution across the entire multiverse is suggested to point towards an ultimate integration. The eventual goal might be the weaving together of all these diverse universal experiences into a single, unified, coherent awareness. But crucially, without erasing the unique wisdom and perspective gained within each individual chamber.
Unity without erasing uniqueness.
Unity without sameness, that's the underlying principle, echoing from the smallest scale to the very largest. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Mont physics, the central shift, the real takeaway, is this radical reimagining of our existence. The universe isn't some cold, sterile clockwork machine just ticking along according to fixed external laws.
No, it's alive.
It's presented as a self-evolving consciousness engine, a system where purpose, meaning, ethics, structure, they're not just human ideas layered on top. They are woven into the very fabric of reality, integrated at every single scale, from the tiniest particle interactions right up to the evolution of galaxies.
And we established that your identity, you, are not just a passive object being pushed around. You are an actively maintained asymmetry, a stable, dynamic pattern, a rendering loop that requires your constant energetic input, your attention, your will, just to persist.
That effort, the energy cost of maintaining that unique separation from perfect equilibrium, that is the work and maybe the privilege of being alive.
And maybe the most practical takeaway for listeners, your emotions. They aren't irrational noise to be ignored or suppressed.
Not at all. They are incredibly precise, immediate physical navigation data. That scattered, anxious, overwhelmed feeling you sometimes get. That's likely your internal tension index, ITI, spiking a direct physical alert that your internal currents of wisdom, curiosity, compassion, and play are out of balance, wasting energy fighting each other.
And that feeling of deep flow, of effortless effort, being in the zone.
That's the physical signal. It's your system telling you you've found and stabilized your optimal Mott limit cycle. You're aligned, coherent, evolving with minimum resistance and maximum integrity.
You know, the source material states that this entire framework wasn't built just out of intellectual curiosity, just to explain the stars. It was built with a very specific philosophical goal.
Yes, to justify the hope in a child's eyes. To provide a physical, operational language for understanding ourselves, a map showing how things break down, but also how they can be repaired, integrated, made whole again.
And to drive home the mandate that your conscious will is a physical operator. It has agency. You are, whether you realize it or not, continuously co-authoring the world you experience through your focus, your meaning, your intention.
The highest state of coherence, the most effective way to navigate reality according to this model, happens when you manage to align your own 4 internal currents, your wisdom, S, your curiosity, S, your compassion, B, with the larger flow of the global Matat field. That allows you to render your reality with maximum purpose and minimum wasted energy.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with the final challenge, the real invitation from this deep dive. If time itself is generated moment by moment through conscious rendering, and if memory isn't fixed but is constantly being re-rendered, updated based on your current state of wisdom and meaning, then what conscious choice are you making right now, today, to rewrite both the history and the future of your own reality?
The capacity to shift your meaning weight. W, to focus your intention. It isn't just philosophy or positive thinking. According to this framework, it's a measurable act of physics with real consequences for the world you inhabit. What reality will you choose to stabilize?